2 summers ago, I stopped putting synthetic fertilizer on my own lawn completely. Cold turkey after 20 years of recommending it to other people. And what happened over the following year is the reason I don't run a 4-step bag program on my own property anymore. I'm not telling you to throw out every bag of fertilizer you own today. That's not the point of this video. I'm going to show you exactly what I did instead, why it worked, and the specific situations where quitting synthetic fertilizer completely is a genuinely good idea versus a mistake. My name's Denny. I've spent the last 20 years working on lawns for a living, and this is the most personal video I've made because it's my own yard, my own experiment, and my own results. Here's what got me started down this path in the first place. And it's a pattern I'd been noticing on client properties for years before I ever tried it on my own lawn. Every single spring, I'd apply a round of synthetic granular fertilizer. And every single time, the lawn would go bright, almost artificially green within about a week. Beautiful color, thick-looking growth, exactly what you'd expect from the bag. But then, without fail, somewhere around week 4 or 5, that color would start fading, even with no change in watering or mowing. By week 6, the lawn looked worse than it did before I ever put the fertilizer down. Thinner, duller, more prone to disease pressure, and needing another application just to get back to where it started. I spent years treating that fade as normal, just how lawns work. Apply again when it fades. It took me a long time to actually ask why a product designed to feed grass kept leaving the lawn worse off a month later than when I started. The answer, once I actually dug into it, changed how I think about lawn care completely. Grass doesn't pull nutrients directly out of synthetic fertilizer the way most people assume. The roots absorb nutrients that have already been processed and made available by microbial life living in the top few inches of soil. Bacteria and fungi that break down organic matter and convert it into forms the plant can actually use. When you spread a bag of synthetic fertilizer, you're delivering a concentrated, immediately available dose of nitrogen and other nutrients directly to the plant, essentially bypassing the soil biology entirely. The grass gets an immediate feast, which is exactly why you see that dramatic week 1 green-up. But high concentrations of synthetic salts, and most granular fertilizer is fundamentally a salt-based product, are genuinely harsh on the microbial life living in that soil. Repeated applications over years gradually reduce the population and diversity of the bacteria and fungi your lawn actually depends on for long-term health, which is why the fade after each application tends to get a little more pronounced, and the lawn becomes a little more dependent on the next application year after year. You're not just feeding the grass, you're slowly starving the soil that's supposed to be feeding the grass on its own. So here's exactly what I did instead, starting that spring 2 years ago. First, I stopped applying any synthetic granular fertilizer entirely. Cold turkey, no gradual taper, just stopped. Second, I started mulching every single clipping back into the lawn, instead of bagging anything. Using a mulching blade that cuts the grass twice under the deck before dropping it, so the pieces fall small enough to work down between the standing blades instead of sitting on top smothering things. Those clippings are roughly 90% water and around 4% nitrogen by dry weight, and left in place they break down within about a week in a healthy lawn, quietly returning a real portion of the lawn's nitrogen needs completely for free every single time I mow. Third, I started applying a 1/4 inch of quality compost across the whole lawn twice a year, once in spring and once in early fall, watered in immediately after spreading. That compost is doing the actual heavy lifting in this whole approach because it's directly feeding the bacterial and fungal populations in the soil, giving them organic material to break down and multiply on, which is the exact opposite of what a synthetic salt application does. Quick, before I walk you through what actually happened month by month, if you're serious about fixing your lawn without wasting money guessing at products, you need a real plan. That's why I wrote the book, a straight step-by-step blueprint to a greener lawn with fewer weeds. Exactly what to buy, where to get it, and when to put it down. Scan the QR code or click the link below to grab your copy. Before I go further into the timeline, I want to mention something I did before I ever stopped the synthetic program, because it's the step most people skip entirely, and it genuinely matters for anyone trying this themselves. I pulled a simple soil test that spring, the kind you can send off to your state's agricultural extension office for around $15 to $20, mailing in a small sample from a few spots around the yard. That test came back showing my organic matter content sitting at a little under 2%, which is on the low end for what a healthy lawn soil should have. And it also flagged a slightly low pH that was likely limiting how efficiently my grass could access some of the nutrients already present in the soil. That test told me two important things. First, it confirmed that my soil biology genuinely needed rebuilding, which is exactly what compost is designed to address over time. Second, it told me I also needed a light application of lime that first spring to correct the pH, since even a rebuilt soil biology struggles to make nutrients available to plant roots if the pH is working against it. I'd recommend anyone trying this approach start with that same $15 soil test rather than assuming their situation matches mine exactly, because a lawn with a genuinely severe nutrient deficiency or a badly out-of-range pH needs that specific problem addressed directly, and compost alone on its own timeline might not correct it fast enough without that extra nudge in year one. Because I want to be straight with you that this wasn't an instant transformation, and anyone telling you switching to a biological approach gives you overnight results is selling you something. Month 1. Honestly, the lawn looked a little duller than it had under the synthetic program. There was no dramatic week 1 green up the way a bag of urea gives you, because I wasn't delivering that concentrated immediate dose anymore. This is the point where a lot of people panic and go back to the bag, and I understand why, because it genuinely looks like a step backward at first. Month 2, after the first compost application had a few weeks to work into the soil, I started noticing the color evening out across the whole yard. Less of the patchy variation I used to get between areas that had absorbed the last fertilizer application differently. Month 3. This is when I really started noticing a texture difference underfoot. The lawn felt denser, and pulling up a small soil sample showed visibly more organic matter and noticeably more earthworm activity than I'd seen the year before. Months 4 through 6, the color had settled into a consistent, deep, even green that didn't fade or surge the way it used to. It just held steady week after week regardless of whether I'd just mowed or it had been a week since I compost. By month 8, going into that first full summer under the new approach, the lawn handled a 2-week dry stretch noticeably better than it had in previous years, holding color and density longer before showing any stress at all, which I attribute directly to the deeper, healthier root system that biological feeding builds over time, compared to the shallower root growth synthetic fertilizer tends to encourage. Here's the piece that actually surprised me the most, and it's the reason the title of this video isn't an exaggeration. By the 1-year mark, disease pressure had dropped noticeably. I used to deal with a light case of dollar spot or brown patch showing up somewhere on my lawn most summers. Nothing severe, but a recurring annoyance. That second summer under the biological program, I didn't see a single outbreak of either. The connection makes sense once you understand it. A lot of the beneficial fungi and bacteria that compost and organic matter feed are directly competitive with the pathogenic fungi that cause turf disease, essentially crowding them out and outcompeting them for space and resources in the soil. A soil biology that's been rebuilt over a year of compost applications isn't just feeding the grass better, it's actively defending against the diseases that used to show up when that biology was thin from years of synthetic salt applications. There's one more result from that first year I didn't expect going in, and it ended up mattering more to me than the color or the density, which was a noticeable drop in weed pressure across the whole yard, without me ever applying a single herbicide application during that entire year. The mechanism behind this makes sense once you think through it. A thick, dense lawn with a healthy, well-fed root system shades the soil surface far more effectively than a thinner lawn does. And most common lawn weed seeds, crabgrass in particular, need direct sunlight hitting bare soil in order to germinate in the first place. As my lawn's density improved through that first summer, there was simply less exposed soil and less direct light reaching the ground between blades, and weed seeds that would have previously found an opening to sprout were instead sitting dormant in the shade of a canopy that hadn't existed at that density the year before. I'm not going to tell you this approach replaces herbicide entirely for every situation. If you're dealing with an established, spreading perennial weed problem, you'll likely still need to address that directly. But for the ordinary annual weeds that pop up in thin or stressed patches, building density through biological feeding turned out to be one of the more effective forms of weed prevention I've ever used. And it wasn't even the goal when I started. It was just a side effect of the soil actually getting healthier. I want to be clear about where this approach genuinely isn't the right call, because I don't want to oversell my own experience as a universal answer for every single lawn out there. If you're establishing brand new sod or seed, that young root system doesn't have the developed capacity to wait around for slow biological nutrient cycling, and a starter fertilizer with readily available phosphorus is genuinely the right tool for that specific situation. Get the new lawn established first, then transition to a biological program once it's mature. If your soil test comes back showing a severe specific nutrient deficiency, iron chlorosis or a serious potassium shortfall, for example, correcting that deficiency directly and quickly sometimes matters more in the short term than waiting for slow biological improvement to eventually address it. And if you're on a strict timeline, hosting an event in 3 weeks, and you need the lawn looking its absolute best right now, a quick synthetic application is still going to outgreen a biological approach in that short a window, because that dramatic fast green-up is a real thing. Synthetic fertilizer genuinely does well, even if it doesn't hold up long-term the way biological feeding does. One more thing I started tracking through that first year, mostly out of curiosity, turned into one of the clearest indicators that the approach was actually working underneath the surface where I couldn't see it day to day. Every few months I'd dig a small 1 square foot section about 6 inches deep and count how many earthworms turned up in that sample. That first spring, before I'd made any changes, I counted somewhere around 3 to 4 earthworms per square foot, which is on the lower end of what a healthy lawn should have. By the following spring, after a full year of compost applications and mulched clippings, that same test in a comparable spot was turning up somewhere between 12 and 15 earthworms per square foot, roughly a 4-fold increase. That number matters more than it might sound like at first, because earthworms are essentially a living scorecard for overall soil health. They thrive specifically in soil with abundant organic matter and minimal chemical disruption. And a single healthy earthworm moves roughly its own body weight in soil every single day, continuously creating the air channels and drainage pathways a lawn needs to handle both heavy rain and dry stretches without stress. Watching that number climb over the year was honestly more convincing to me than the color of the grass itself, because it told me the underlying system driving everything else was genuinely rebuilding, not just putting on a good show above ground. Because this ended up being one of the more pleasant surprises of the whole experiment. My old 4-application synthetic program used to run somewhere around $150 to $200 a year in bags alone. Not counting the time spent applying each round, the compost-based approach, buying compost in bulk from a local landscape supply yard rather than small bagged amounts from a hardware store, runs somewhere around $60 to $80 a year for 2 applications covering a standard suburban lawn. And the mulching mower blade was a one-time $20 purchase that's still doing its job 2 years later. So beyond the health of the lawn itself, this switch also cut my annual lawn feeding cost by more than half, while the lawn itself, by every measure I actually care about, color, density, drought resilience, and disease resistance, is in better shape than it's ever been under the old program. If you want to try this yourself, here's exactly how I'd start. Stop applying synthetic granular fertilizer at your next scheduled application, whenever that happens to be. And don't taper it off gradually, just stop. Switch your mower to a mulching blade if you don't already have one, and commit to leaving every clipping on the lawn from that point forward. Source a load of quality compost from a local landscape supply yard. Buying in bulk is dramatically cheaper than bagged compost from a hardware store. And spread a 1/4 inch across your whole lawn, watering it in immediately. Repeat that compost application again in about 6 months, and then give it real time, at minimum a full growing season, honestly closer to a full year, before you judge whether this is working for your yard, because the month 1 dip is normal and expected, and it's exactly the point where most people quit right before the actual results start showing up. That's genuinely the whole story of what I did and why my own lawn hasn't looked back since. Thanks a lot for watching. And let me know in the comments if you've ever tried cutting synthetic fertilizer out completely. I'd love to hear how it went for your own yard. Now, if you're serious about fixing your lawn without wasting more money guessing at products, you need the right equipment and a plan. My book appearing on your screen right now is a straight step-by-step blueprint to a greener lawn, with fewer weeds. Exactly what to buy, where to get it, and when to put it down. Scan the QR code or click the link below to get your copy. Or head over to fixyourlawnin30days.com to get the lawn you deserve. Have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.